ibuprofen. So,
Sure.
I mean, you have to be really careful and not taking this. I've seen it all over the internet and run with it with their no scientific basis behind it. And the whole point of the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in order for a medicine to get on the shelves in your pharmacy or supermarket, it has to be severely tested for years before they allow it to go on the shelves. And so if you haven't heard anything from the FDA about we're taking Tylenol or ibuprofen or Advil off the shelves, then you can pretty much bet this is just somebody's idea who could be your next door neighbor writing this, or somebody like that that has no really business giving medical advice to hundreds, thousands, millions of people.
Sure.
It's just a tragedy. It's just unfortunate that
Sure.
that happens, but you have to be smart enough to know who you're listening to or inquire as to who wrote it before you run and take something that could be dangerous to you.
And what is this paracetamol they're talking about, Dr. Albright? I've never heard of that one.
It's just that's the chemical name for a generic anti-inflammatory. I mean, it's the ingredient is usually paired with something that keeps the fever down or something, but it's just a minor pain reliever.
Sure. And let me ask you this, Dr. Albright. Aside from the information you just described earlier in terms of washing your hands and keeping your hands out of your face and those types of things, what do you also recommend for people's mental well-being? Because I know we were speaking before we went live, and I was telling you that, I had to sort of step back for a minute because I was becoming so saturated that, I find myself, when my toenail was itching, oh my goodness, my toenail's itching. What's that all about? Just getting to the point where you're so inundated with different perspectives and stuff flying around the internet, and you get one opinion from this doctor, then the president saying one thing that you just don't know what to do. What do you recommend people do for their mental well-being?
Well, that's a great point, and I'm sure it's happening all over. And the quarantining doesn't help either because you really don't have the usual outs or recreation or diversions in our life that we're accustomed to. So
Sure.
You're sitting, like I'm sure millions of Americans are sitting in front of that TV watching Fox News or MSNBC news all day long, and it's terrifying to a person who really doesn't understand what's going on.
Exactly.
It's not only terrifying, but as you said, it's confusing because you're hearing different things, contrasting views from different people, and you figure that the president ought to know what he's talking about, but the doctors ought to know what they're talking about, and they're saying totally different and contradicting things. So I would recommend that you just take a break like you did, and they don't really advise you to be walking around outside because you don't want to conduct. So, but just turn that off. I've seen people saying they start reading books, or they start doing things around the house, the chores that you've been trying to get to, or things like that. Make yourself useful, do some projects, figure out some things that you like to do to just take your mind off of it, because the whole, you can actually, literally drive yourself into a frenzy, and you don't need to do that, and it's not going to be helpful at all. So I would suggest, taking up some of those things. You can have discussions. My wife and her friends are having these video chats where they're talking from all over the country about their women's groups or things like that to kind of, create some diversion. And they never talk about the coronavirus issue. They always talk about things that are uplifting. What about our last trip? To really kind of get themselves in a very positive frame of mind. So that's another thing that is catching on. And this DJ Nice, who had a quarantine party on the radio where he played hits after hits, and he named the people that were signing in: Michelle Obama, Oprah, all kind of big stars, Jamie Foxx, tuned in to his broadcast. And so it gave people a sense of community and being in an environment that was, stress relieving, and made people, I'm sure, feel very good about, somebody was taking the time to try to engage people on a social level, even though we weren't face to face. So things like that is what I would recommend, to try to take your mind off and try to ease things up a little bit.
Now, one of the things that we've also been seeing, Doc, is that I guess for people to keep from going stir crazy, I know people are walking and they're doing other types of activities. And I'm not talking about people that, husband and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever situation, you're walking with your significant other, just taking a walk around the neighborhood. But what do you say to folks that are meeting up with other families and other friends in the parks, and they're having play dates and those types of things in the park, with the social distance concerns in mind?
Well, generally, unfortunately, those things are totally the opposite of what the social distance, because if you go to gather, you will gather. And I mean, it's a good idea. And I see people like through my window who are, walking their dogs and stuff like that. And they come up on another person and they circle around and they careful not to touch. And if you must do that, that's the way to do it. However, just keep in mind that if you're out there, you don't know. And one of the things that people are saying is that everybody should behave like they have the virus. And that means you don't give it to anybody. I haven't visited my mother, who's 90 years old, because
Sure.
I don't want, I know how fragile she is. And so we are refraining. We talk on the phone every day, so that she knows we're there. My sister calls her a couple of times a day. So she's in constant contact with us. We know she's doing okay, but we're not going over there, exposing her to the virus, because she's in the very high risk group. And if she gets that virus, she may not be strong enough to survive
Sure.
it. So they are certainly suggesting that you have as least or the fewest person-to-person contact you can have, because that's how we're going to defeat the virus. But if you must, then keeping that social distance and not touching them or other people is the way to go.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the warm weather, and I know in certain parts of the country, the weather is about to get into the 80s and into the warmer digits. Explain again to the audience how the warm weather may have an impact on this situation.
Yeah, it's very, very simple. The virus is fairly fragile, and the makeup of the viruses has a protein and fat coat, and they do not do well in heat. One of the ways to get rid of the virus on a worldwide scale is that, as you know, they call cold and flu season.
Yes.
It's in the fall, and in winter, and you never when you hear somebody with a summer cold, that's really unusual. And that's because the viruses don't do well in heat. And where we are here in Riverside, which is almost in the desert, we're really looking forward to it heating up, because the viruses don't survive well in heat. And that you can imagine the difference between the virus landing on a cold steel surface like a refrigerator versus outside when the 100-degree heat has that hot as almost a frying pan. The virus can't survive in that heat. So it's always a natural phenomenon. When you ever see flu season, it's in a cooler or colder, damper area. Whereas in the summertime, people are out and you see a lot less viral infections and colds and things like that simply due to the weather. So the fact that it's heating up is going to help us to a large degree.
Now, what is the approximate temperature range that it starts to have that kind of impact on the virus?
Well, the truth in that question, Mike, is nobody really knows.
Okay.
Because they don't really study the virus like, it would have taken the Germans to do that against the Jews, because that's the kind of experimenting on humans, they would say, well, how do the people get infected with the virus at this temperature, or at that temperature, or at this temperature? And that's the kind of experimenting the Germans were doing with the Jews. They were finding out answers to how long can a person stay underwater before they drown. They were finding out the answers to those questions. But in a civilized civilization, you don't do that kind of testing. So those answers are difficult to answer. So we don't really know, but we do know because if you look at curves in terms of healthcare and epidemics and pandemics and everything, there's always that upsurge when it's cooler and that's what we're talking about when they say get past this. What they're talking about really is get past this season, this flu season, into the time when the warm temperatures get rid of these viruses and stuff like that. So that's what we're looking for, and that's what they're talking about when they say get through this. That even if they don't know what they mean, what they're saying is get through this season of flu and viruses to a point where we don't see them in the summer, and then the health care of everybody should improve.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this with that in mind. Would it be conceivable if people turned up the heat in their residences and businesses that might help?
Well, number one, we've closed the businesses, so that's not, but you can't have people sweating inside of a place. That's
right.
Not going to work either. They're not going to tolerate that. So, and you're not going to usually get it hot enough inside your house. It's the same thing, So you really, the best way to defeat this virus is to not infect yourself with it, not do that. And if you sanitize and use those wipes and keep the hand sanitizer on your hands, keep it off your hands, and wash your hands good, 20 minutes, 20 seconds with hot water and soap that lathers up. Because the reason why the soap and the lather works on your hands and why they're saying hot water is because with the heat of the water, again, the heat of the water and the chemicals in the soap, it breaks down the membranes of the virus and kills it. So that's why they say 20 seconds of vigorous hand washing with soap suds all over you, that will kill the virus, dissolve the capsule that the virus lives in, and that will then, once the capsule is gone, the virus can't survive. So that's how if a virus is not alive, and that's why antibiotics don't work. But if you break down capsule that protects the virus, then it's destroyed.
So, so I'm assuming with that advice that's been given, and hopefully people are following that advice, that those individuals who have contracted it, they've either picked it up from a surface situation or they've been breathed on or I guess coughed on or sneezed on. Is that a correct assumption?
That is the exact assumption. That the only way the virus can't, like for instance, if you were just walking down the street and you had your eyes closed, something over like a mask on or with goggles and stuff like that, and somebody coughed on you, you wouldn't contract the virus. If they coughed on your hand, and then you put your hands up to your nose or up to your eyes or something like that, or was eating something and the virus is on it and you ingest it, then you're likely to get it. But generally, you have to almost eat the virus for it to just walking past somebody. If they don't sneeze on you, you're totally safe.
Wow. That's really, well, that's great information, first and foremost. And I guess we have to just really emphasize to the community at large is to be careful of the surfaces and keep your hands away from your face. Is it that simple?
It's that simple.
Wow.
Because that's the only way you contract the virus.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you clarified some things, Doc, particular that information that was circulating around regarding Advil and not taking Advil and it, exacerbating this whole situation, because that was flying around hot and heavy today. As a matter of fact, I had about 3 or 4 different people that sent that to me this afternoon. And I'm just glad that you were able to clarify that for us. So we're going to